Hello, this is Darren Pulsipher, Chief Solution Architect of Public Sector at Intel, and welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology. On today's episode, we're going to talk about managing complexity in the cloud with David Esposito. Today's episode is a continuation of my interview with David Esposito, Global Director of Solutions Architecture at Aiven, where we talk about managing complexity in cloud migration. There's some cultural shifts and there's some business decisions that are made around this. It's not just automate everything. So how do you know, what business processes should we put into place when managing my cloud assets to decrease my complexity?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, you really need to have infrastructure as code and automated deployments in place. If you may be able to get by as a startup, but at some point it's not going to scale past a small group of people that know how to do the manual script stuff. So as you grow, that needs to be in place. But everything else is really a conversation of define what risks there are to the company. So outages, downtimes, and then have an open conversation between leadership and engineering of how do we solve or protect against that, and how much do we want to invest in that. And,
Gotcha.
and the complexity conversations that we had, multi-region, multi-cloud, for some companies, it absolutely makes sense to have the highest level of uptime. So healthcare, for example, you may need to be able to have all of that data backed up in multiple locations, as well as have all of the services available, because it could be a critical life-saving decision based on that data. But if you're in, e-commerce and it's April, maybe you spin down that second region because, not much is going to happen when people get out of school and go on vacation.
Right. No, that makes sense. So you mentioned multi-cloud. I was on a panel discussion just earlier this week, and there was actually a pretty big argument over multi-cloud and single cloud and the complexity of multi-cloud. Doesn't adding multiple clouds increase complexity?
Yes. Short answer. Yeah, absolutely resounding.
So
yes.
So why go? Why even approach it? Why even go there?
The most of the motivation that we've had from customers is one of the use cases I just described with healthcare. They can't put all their eggs in one basket, and even if it's multi-region, what happens if there's a whole networking outage on GCP, for example? What are they going to do? So when there are uptime requirements there for customer data or life-saving decisions, it makes sense to go multi-cloud. The other one that we've seen is for highly regulated industries. If financial services or oil and gas or federal go into one cloud, what happens if they get a bad business deal or things shift or data gets leaked or there's a security incident? What would it cost to move to another cloud? Or what's their backup plan should something like that happen? And the financial industries, the regulators are encouraging multi-cloud deployments so that should anything happen in either of those, they can shut it off and then deploy plan C later on.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Have you run into any of your customers where they went to multi-cloud because of cost? I'm just wondering, is that a factor now, so they can play the cloud service providers against each other to get better costs, or is that already a commoditized market that it just doesn't matter anymore?
Yeah, when you get down to the fine details of the financial incentives, usually volume, you get discounts at scale. So usually that's what it comes down to, and you have better negotiating power the more you spend. So that's what we've seen. I'll say your question about you're thinking about in the opposite direction. Do you go multi-cloud? Usually what we see is larger companies acquire smaller startups or companies for specific features, and we're a GCP shop, but that weird company's over in AWS, and how do we get them over?
Yeah.
So because their discounts, their cloud discounts don't apply to the other ones. Like, we have $10 million in GCP credits. Come over for training, professional services. You pretty much run for free for the next 2 years with our incentives. Gotcha. So it's usually cloud consolidation for cost.
Oh, that's really interesting. So, I mean, then how do you think that the cloud service providers are differentiating themselves now?
Because
it can't just be on price. It can't just be on price. Otherwise, they're going to drive the price all the way down, right? Where no one's making money anymore, and they're all making a lot of money. So
yes,
they're doing something.
Yep. I'll say real quick before we go into that, the nuance of multi-cloud is if you're thinking about going multi-cloud or regulators are pushing you, there are some complexities with difference of APIs. So if you're in GCP and you know how to deploy everything, and you're used to compute and those local SSDs, then you're thinking of going to AWS. Now you have to relearn the platform, relearn the deployment process, and you may even have to rewrite a lot of that code. So there's containerization is extremely popular in that let's run containers on Kubernetes, and I can have managed Kubernetes on GCP or AWS or Azure. So now I can just deploy and I can have multi-cloud fairly easily. But it comes more complex or difficult with other managed services for, say, I want to do Postgres in multiple clouds. Even picking Postgres 13, there's different configurations in AWS versus GCP. There may be different patching versions, different networking setups, different extensions installed in each. So, a service in one cloud is not the same as a service in the other.
Another. So, I'm glad you brought up Kubernetes, because there is a trend to move towards containerization because I can deploy it anywhere. Are you starting to see stateful containers then for like, hey, I'm just going to spin my own Postgres container, forget using the DBaaS in the cloud service provider because I'm now tied to them. I'm stuck, right?
Yeah. And what we've seen is, I think there's a trend in the fight going in both directions. Stateful can be run in Kubernetes, or stateful should never be run. I think I'm an engineer, so the answer is it depends.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But it really depends on the features that you need. If you're looking for world-class Postgres, so point-in-time recovery with 5-second flush rates, and you're looking for backups with automated recovery or forking, you're looking to do maybe even just optimizations of the machines. How do you deploy an instance of a certain size, not deal with a noisy neighbor, and have optimized infrastructure like local SSDs with NVMe interface? How do you ensure that in a containerized environment?
Yeah, you really can.
So, and that's what DBaaS is. Database as a service. That's what we do. Is we look at what does world class look like, and that becomes more important as you scale. So if you're doing Kafka and 1,000 messages per second,
no big deal.
Your own container is probably fine. But if you're starting to push 1 million plus messages per second, you're pushing a gigabyte per second. That's a completely different conversation.
All right, let's also talk on the complexity side. Let's talk a little bit about security, right? Because this is a big problem right now. We just had the big SolarWinds attack. Last year is when they sprung the trap. They've been playing around in people's DevOps environments for several years, just waiting. How do we deal with security? Because, hey, security in the cloud's a different beast than in your own data center.
Yep. Yeah, and we have one of the guys from my team comes from he has a U.S. federal government background. So, lockdown networks, there's, the air gap is what they call it, is,
yep.
You don't need a VPN, you don't need encrypted anything because data can't get out anyway. And I think a lot of people treat private data centers similar to that, whether it's private cloud or actually on premises. inside their own data centers. They treat it similarly in that they don't employ the certain best practices encrypted, in transit, and at rest. When you go to the cloud, you have to think about slightly different things, but the most important thing to think about is data is going outside of your walls, which is okay, as long as you have this appropriate security controls in place to ensure data doesn't leak and doesn't have unauthorized access, as well as you meet any compliance requirements. So you really need to look at, don't try to think of it as we're going to move to the cloud and everything's going to be the exact same lockdown. We're going to move to the cloud and we're going to meet the needed security requirements.
All right. So that requires training.
Yep.
It does.
Yep.
I mean,
yeah.
Let's just be brutally honest, right?
Yes.
It requires training because my data is in the open. In fact, yep. I don't know if it was you or someone else I was talking to. They went and did a security audit at one company, and they decreased their threat for cyber attacks by just taking their S3 containers and not making them public. They had their S3 containers public. I'm like, oh,
yep.
Yeah, I wonder why you had data leakage or ransomware, because you gave that to everybody.
Yep. And that's an interesting one because S3 is encrypted at rest, but not if you have programmatic access through publicly exposed buckets. But along with the training, you also have to know what the cloud and managed service providers are doing because, for example, our databases, we run on compute, EC2 or GCP compute, or Azure. When we store to disk, there's one level of encryption that's done at the cloud level. So the cloud provider encrypts those disks for us. So your data is encrypted at rest. We then, at operating system level, do another layer of encryption with our own managed keys. So you have two people that are securing. So data is double encrypted at rest, and any data in transit is encrypted. So with usually host specific keys. So anything going to the server, it's encrypted for that particular server. And then when we kill a server or when it's decommissioned, throw away the key, and now it's locked with our key, and just the cloud provider is locked with their key as well. So there's a lot of smart people. I didn't come up with that, but there's a lot of smart people that think about cloud security. And with things out in the open, how do you
lock it down? So that brings up I think our next point, and that's what is Aiven doing in the space, because you've talked about decreasing complexity, managing costs, and also security. So now's your time to pitch Aiven. I mean, because when I saw your guys' stuff, I said that you guys have something here that's really compelling that I think my listeners would love to hear about.
Yeah, like I said, I come from an engineering background. I'm not a salesman, but I am in the sales organization. And to frame it a little bit, I was a platform or enterprise or application architect, something that was running Kafka at scale, doing IT automation. We're doing 5 billion events a day, so 50,000 events per second. And at one point, we grew to the maturity of, what do we do with this Kafka instance? We have an ops team that is, there's a lot of pain managing it. They're patching, applying 24/7, people on call. So does it make sense to manage it? And I started evaluating managed Kafka service providers. One of the companies that popped up was Aiven. Aiven was one of the first companies to offer managed Kafka in the cloud about 5 or 6 years ago. So there's already an established track record. And when I looked at Aiven's offering, they did all the open source technologies I had experience with. Elasticsearch, I ran Elasticsearch at scale, multiple multi-terabyte clusters of Elasticsearch. I ran, there's about 20 instances of MySQL running in our database. We had Redis, some instances as large as 32 or 56 gigabytes running on GCP. And then Kafka, essentially. So looking at Aiven in the offering, that's a lot of what I had experience with and what I was excited about. So joining the solutions architecture team, I got to work with a lot of interesting customers in automotive, e-commerce, the government, fintech, to talk about what's the cloud solution, what's the cloud strategy. So I was really interested in joining the company from that perspective because of the offering, but they did it better than anyone else we saw. So focusing on security, performance, and resilience in the cloud.
So the big play here is operational excellence, because you guys aren't right. You didn't rewrite Kafka. You're not spinning your own version of these things. You know how to set them up, manage them for reliability, for cost, and security, right?
Yep. That's exactly it. And the mission is to make developers' lives better. So even just
that's a good mission. I like that mission. I'm a software developer too, so I know.
Yes, spinning up a free trial, you have production-ready Kafka going in 5 minutes, and help articles and tutorials to walk you through. You're sending a Kafka message in the cloud with cloud-native best practices in less than 10 minutes.
That's impressive.
That hooked me. But it's been interesting seeing how different companies think about that and apply the best practices and rely on us for the different open source technologies. But it's also great to be able to contribute back, and that we don't just build proprietary features that we get to keep and charge more for. Every contribution that we have goes back to the open source upstream project.
Oh, that's awesome. Hey, David, this has been great. I've learned some things today, which is great. I always like learning new things, and I think our audience will really appreciate your journey through this multi-cloud deployment world that we're in.
Yep, absolutely, Darren. Really appreciate the time. As always, very fun conversation. And if you want to spin up a free trial, or anybody else, you can read any questions, or if you just want to talk about cool technology stuff or big numbers, I will be the first to admit I know there's 84,600 seconds, or is it 86,400 seconds per day? So let's talk about big numbers. Let's talk about fun projects. Otherwise, check us out with a free trial. Darren, I really appreciate the time.
Hey, thanks a lot, David. Thank you for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you enjoyed our podcast, give it 5 stars on your favorite podcasting site or YouTube channel. You can find out more information about Embracing Digital Transformation at embracingdigital.org. Until next time, go out and do something wonderful.